A very good morning to all our guests, dignitaries, and participants. I am Dr. Nida Jamil Khan, Assistant Professor, Department of Biosciences, Jamia Millia Islamia. On behalf of our university, I feel privileged to welcome you to our centenary lecture of Professor Ashutosh Sharma as part of the centenary celebrations of our esteemed university. In view of the COVID-19 pandemic and the unprecedented situation across the world, it is ostensible to have a virtual format for celebrations. To inaugurate, the advantage of this format is that it makes the program accessible to many more people in their own comfort and ways. To inaugurate the centenary lecture, it is my great honor and pleasure to invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Ma'am, Professor Najma Akhtar. She will enlighten us with her views. As an advocate for gender equity, Dr. Akhtar is the first woman to hold the post of Vice Chancellor, Jamia Millia Islamia. Prior to joining university, she was the professor and head, Department of Training and Capacity Building and Education, National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration. She has led several international consultancy programs, authored 2 books, and contributed numerous book chapters and research papers. May I now take the liberty to request our Vice Chancellor, Ma'am, to say a few words and commence our event.
Thank you, Nida, for inviting me. Professor Ashutosh Sharma ji, Secretary, Department of Science, Technology, and from Government of India. Professor Simi Farad Basir, the Dean of Faculty of Natural Sciences. Professor Zahid Ashraf, Head of the Department, Biotechnology, Jamia, and Dr. Nida Jamil Khan from Biosciences, Jamia. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. I'm on behalf of Jamia fraternity, take this opportunity to accord a warm welcome to Professor Ashutosh Sharma ji and all the learned participants. It's a great matter of pride for us to have Professor Ashutosh Sharma ji with us today for the Jamia Centenary Lectures, wherein he will share his thoughts, his knowledge, his remarkable scientific journey and vision for us. Needless to say that we proudly indulge in the centenary celebrations as a century is a memorable milestone in the history of every institution. And so it is for this in the glorious history of Jamia Millia. Jamia Millia has nurtured through difficult times. This university holds fast to the determination, resilience, and forbearance of its founders. It braves hardship and rides out the crisis and extraordinary situations by virtue of its exceptional measures, professional devotion, constancy, and commitment of its staff members and students. It is amply evidenced by its scaling new heights every year, and with its modest beginning in 1920, it has made momentous growth in a very short span of its life. It is now being recognized among the top 10 universities of India with remarkable international ranking. I must introduce you to briefly about Jamia. Jamia caters to educational needs of every section of the society. The student population is as diverse as the country itself, representing all communities and gender. The university has now become the desired destination for students and academics from all over the world. It is known for its liberal ethos, composite culture, scientific temper, and environment of free thinking, conducive to the pursuit of higher learning and research and deepest thinking and contemplation. It goes without saying that the current coronavirus pandemic has drastically transformed the world. It has changed the way we lived, socialized, and traveled around. The pandemic has also adversely impacted every sector, creating not only a health crisis, but also educational, social, economic, and other crises for the entire country, or rather for the whole world. It has pushed the educational institutions and the universities to opt for extraordinary measures involving radical modifications and changes. Responding to the present need, we emerged from the critical situation with fresh perspectives. We also resorted to turning the challenges into wealth of opportunities while refurbishing our system and reinventing ways. We still have to reevaluate our ideas and restart investing in healthcare system, scientific research and development for a better and a secure future for not only for us but also for the country. As we moved away from the conventional pedagogy, facilitating the technology to be the way of teaching learning activities, we shifted to the new norm of technology-mediated transaction and interaction. The exceptional contribution of Jamia faculty, I must underline this, that I got a very good response from the Jamia faculty, and their findings have palpably increased the visibility of their departments and enhanced the national and international ranking of the university. Their dedicated and continuous effort has brought the university in the league of premier institutions. I deem it my duty to say a few words about our learned guest today. Dr. Sharma has been a secretary to the Government of India since 2015, heading the Department of Science and Technology, DST, where he helped initiate several new programs related to infrastructure and human capacity building, innovation and startups, R&D in advanced manufacturing, waste processing, clean energy and cyber physical systems, and in industry academia cooperation, science communications, encouraging women scientists, and major international collaborations in the area of priority for the nation. Therefore, Jamia opted to have his august presence and listen to his guidance for future road to take up by this 100-year-old institution. In recognition of the outstanding achievement of Professor Ashutosh Sharma ji in multidisciplinary research encompassing chemical engineering and nanotechnology, and his dedication, devotion, and contribution to the cause of making India a self-reliant superpower in science and technology. I would like to use this opportunity to request Professor Ashutosh Sharma ji to continue his association with Jamia. Please be with Jamia and give us guidance. Your mentorship and guidance will help the younger faculty, students, and university to achieve greater excellence and accolades in this research and development. On behalf of my university, I'd like to thank DST for the support received in terms of extramural research funding. DST PERS program, which resulted in the development of Central Instrumentation Facility, as well as DST FIST program for supporting research infrastructure building in different departments, along with numerous extramural projects by both DST and DST SERB. As head of DST, we thank Professor Ashutosh ji today and look forward for generous future support for development of our faculty, particularly the women researchers, under special efforts being made by DST. I request Dr. Sharma for his unstinted support to Jamia towards accomplishing nation's vision in new millennium. With my deep gratitude to Professor Ashutosh Sharma ji, I would like to formally request you for your insightful lecture. Your enlightened lecture will make the centenary celebration of Jamia Millia Islamia even more significant and remarkable. And I request the audience to welcome our distinguished guest today with a big round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Dear Vice Chancellor, ma'am, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and guiding us in every way possible to achieve our ambitions and aspirations. Now, with the permission of Vice Chancellor, ma'am, we present a token of appreciation to Professor Ashutosh Sharma for accepting our invitation and becoming part of our centenary celebration in the form of a portrait. This portrait was made possible with exceptional support from Dr. Faiz from the Faculty of Fine Arts at Jamia Millia Islamia. Sana Rafi and Sakshi Mankotia, Department of Geography, will unveil the portrait.
Thank you so very much indeed. This is so much hard work. I totally appreciate it. I greatly look forward. I don't have a jacket of that kind with me, but anyway, it looks good. Thank you so very much. Greatly look forward to visit you sometime. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce our respected speaker for the day, Professor Ashutosh Sharma. Professor Sharma currently holds the key position of Secretary to the Government of India, Department of Science and Technology. He has obtained his BTech degree from IIT Kanpur in 1982, Master's degree from Pennsylvania State University in 1984, and 3 years later, his PhD in Chemical Engineering from Buffalo State University. Professor Ashutosh Sharma's research contributions are highly interdisciplinary, spanning a wide range in nanotechnology. His cutting-edge contributions have been published in around 270 peer-reviewed papers and well received in over 100 invited keynote conference presentations. A man with boundless energy, Professor Sharma endlessly believes that any new idea or new concept shall ultimately result in a useful product which the society can make use of. This philosophy of his motivated him to file over 10 patents, which are at various stages of fructification. It is no wonder that the scientific community has taken cognizance of Professor Sharma's outstanding contributions to the cause of science and showered him with several honors and awards, including the inaugural Infosys Prize in Engineering and Computer Sciences, Homi J. Bhabha Award of UGC, the Syed Hussain Zahir Medal of INSA, Distinguished Illuminous Award of IIT Kanpur, and the Lifetime Achievement Award of the Indian Science Congress Association. Having been entrusted with the responsibility of taking India forward through science and technology, the country fervently wishes that Professor Sharma achieves a paradigm shift in this area and leads India to become a superpower in science and technology. This is our great honor and pleasure to have Professor Ashutosh Sharma with us to deliver the National Science Day public lecture entitled Science and Scientists in the New Millennium. We would request him for his company and words. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Namaskar. Respected Professor Najma Akhtar, Vice Chancellor, indeed the first woman Vice Chancellor of the university, of this very prestigious 100-year-old university that has contributed so much to the society, to the nation building, to in every sphere of knowledge. I was just looking at the webpage of the university. This is indeed a holistic university. It's got every compartment of knowledge, which is represented with strength and with scale. So I haven't any doubt that that this is a strong foundation on which the university would continue to build in the years and decades and indeed centuries to come. I just hope that the climate change doesn't overtake us when thinking about the centuries. A century is a very long time, and the fact that many of the best of our institutions have kind of little bit degenerated over that period. It is very heartening to note that Jamia Millia has not only stood its ground, but has built on it, has gone from strength to strength. So I'm also happy to see Professor Simi Bashir and Nida Khan. That's correct, right? That's Nida Khan. And I'm especially happy to see that you see this entire program is run by women. It is indeed a first. And this is something which is very dear to my heart, and I would talk about it a little bit later. To say, how do we get better, much better representation of women scientists in our STEM areas as a researcher, as a leader, and how that's going to happen. Then, of course, all the distinguished faculty, staff, and students and others who have joined us today. I'm indeed very grateful to the university for giving me an opportunity to be with you all today and to share some thoughts. Now, the thoughts I would be sharing, of course, that this is the centenary celebrations, glorious 100 years. And I also noted that it was ranked number one in NIRF survey for 2019 among the central universities. That's not an easy measure by any standard. This is something so very heartening indeed. And as I was saying, I greatly look forward, in fact, to have a physical visit and to interact with faculty and students at the first opportunity. As soon as your mask will go down, I'm there. So now, what is it that we want to talk about? First of all, I'll tell you that this discussion that we have now is not about a narrow and deep area of science. Of course, that each one of us as a scientist create new knowledge, and it's often getting very narrow and very deep. But behind it all, there are architecture, structure, and processes of doing effective science, of doing good science, of doing relevant science, of doing science with a direction, and the science which actually brings value to the society, and it brings excitement of the discovery. So it's about doing quality science, which also is relevant. So this is not about a particular area of science, and indeed a particular area of a silo of knowledge. But to repeat again, it's about the processes, architecture, structure. As to no matter what I do as a scientist, there are some things that I have to pay attention to. And because I just saw that the topic that perhaps I gave is science and scientists in the new millennium. So what does it mean? It means what are the challenges and opportunities of science? And how do scientists actually respond to those challenges? Those challenges are not Mickey Mouse challenges of the past. In fact, they are of a different nature, but they are going to have very widespread impact on who we are, how we think about skills, how we think about education, how we think about creation of knowledge, and indeed, how do we think about the consumption of that knowledge or the use of that knowledge? So these are huge challenges, even though the future is coming at us at faster and faster rate than ever before. Now, let us put this little bit in historic perspective. When you see a whole lot of science and technology and indeed other areas of knowledge have been intimately related to the changes that have happened in industry. So this is just one perspective. I'm not saying every change occurs because of what happens in economy or what happens in industry, but this is certainly a very strong pillar of that change. So if you were to go back and look at Industry 0, our life in technology begins there. Industry 0 was basically driven by muscle. It was driven by brute force. So essentially, now industry in the sense that we understand it, you basically say, look, I got I got power, so I'm just going to walk in and take your stuff, and that's my industry. Industry one basically is what we call industrialization. And industrialization, it started with the steam power. The steam power, which basically means that all the industry was centralized. It was huge. It was around coal mines. And it created disruptions of unprecedented scale in all aspects of society. It was also the time, if we were to look at Industry Zero and Industry One, that participation of women actually in science, technology, and indeed in many other processes of society took a bit of beating. And the reason for that is clear if you are looking at muscle, if you are looking at working in coal mines, if you're working in, away from home in centralized big factories, which is very demanding. So that happened. Now, industry two basically is the rise of electric power. Electric power, what that means is that the power got distributed, which means that the means of production and consumption got distributed. They got into our homes, and which empowered each one of us, and it allowed the rise of distributed machines, little gadgets that all 40s, 50s, 60s of the last century, the last millennium, and the rise of industry three we have seen in our lives. Most of us have seen it, just happened around the corner in the 70s, somewhere there. I used the first email in 1982. And I said to myself, this was an experimental system between universities in the US. Somebody said that I did PhD at Buffalo State University. I just want to correct it. Actually, it's the State University of New York at Buffalo. These are two different universities. But anyhow, not that matters. So I remembered I was sitting there on the terminal talking to a friend at Carnegie Mellon, and I said, my God, it's going to simplify my life in the future. I couldn't have been more wrong. Let me put it up front. Okay, so essential point is, and of course, the same thing happened when we got this stuff here, right? We say, this is going to simplify my life, right? But now you see you're part of 100 WhatsApp groups, and we are totally connected, right? So now this is not to say anything about negative about any of these technologies, but to understand that every technology has a light and a shadow. Now, if we were to understand that shadow very clearly, then we can plan for it. And what does it mean to plan for, to understand the shadow and to plan for it? It means that we do actually a life cycle analysis, and we look at all the impacts of that technology on different aspects of our doing business and our society. We do a life cycle analysis, and the second aspect is we look at the nexus. Nothing exists in isolation. So when I look at water, I look at agriculture, because 70%, 75% water is used in agriculture, used or abused, or whichever way you want to put it. When I look at agriculture, I look at health, I look at nutrition. When I look at any of these things, whether it's energy, water, health, education, society as a whole, it has a nexus. Oftentimes, the technologies come about in isolation. Okay, they are driven by a particular company, they are driven by a particular lobby, it's not by participation of society at large that technologies come into being. So there is always the danger of a shadow that is cast by that technology. And why is that important for the things that we are discussing today? It is important because, as I said, the challenges of future are of a very unprecedented nature. Look at a challenge like sustainable development. So it was never a problem 20 years ago when we were young and stuff, right? 30 years ago, nobody talked about climate change. They said, anyway, if somebody talked about it, other people shut him and saying that's not real concern. Right? Sustainable development. We never before, as a nation, as a globe, as a society, lived under the constraints of climate, environment constraints. We thought that this party was going to continue forever. There is no forever. There is no free lunch. So sustainable development, climate change, environment, and on the horizon is a huge challenge which is the rise of intelligent machines. You call them cyber physical systems. So people often ask, what is the future? Look, we don't know the exact form that technology and science will take in the future, but we know the direction. The direction of the future is what the mind craves. So if I were to tell you today, make a list of what is it that the mind desires, what is it that we are all working for in this world, that to satisfy those demands of the mind, there would be an appropriate technology that matches the expectations and demands. And the journey of science and technology can be mapped onto those things. I'll get to that, but to say the rise of intelligent machines. Now, the future of science and technology is all about convergence. It's about integration. Now, what happened is somewhere along the way in the last 100 years, we fragmented knowledge. We fragmented it more and more. So there was chemistry, there was physical chemistry, there was organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, biochemistry, industrial chemistry. And then within each of these compartments of knowledge, there are subcompartments. And this division of knowledge occurred because of a good reason. That good reason is ease of training undergraduates so that they have a set of tools that would allow them to work in a particular place, in a particular corporation and industry, in academia. It gives a sense of identity to the person who is being taught this. So at the end of it, I say I'm a chemical engineer, whoever I am, a chemist, biologist, whatever. That brings me a sense of identity. It brings me a community that I can interact with, and I can understand their nomenclature and language, and therefore I can contribute to the growth of that area. So all of that happened for a good purpose, and also in relation to the rise of different industries. There's a chemical engineering came about because there was rise of petrochemical industry, there was a rise of petroleum refining and so on. In response to that challenge, by combining the areas of physical chemistry, some chemistry here, some engineering there, some mechanical engineering, whole lot of this, and then bringing our own insights into it, came the area of chemical engineering. And then later on, it integrated in its fold materials and so on, and biology, biotechnology, and so on. Right. So now the point is, having done all of this in the last 100 years, now we look at the problems, the challenges of the future. For example, rise of intelligent machines. Then I say, what do I do about it? Which domain of knowledge does it belong to? I look at sustainable development, I look at water, I look at health, I look at clean energy. And then I keep scratching my head saying, which domain of knowledge does it belong to? The answer is none. Okay, so while having created these domains, now we have come to a point which calls for the backward integration or the synthesis of all this great amount of information and knowledge that we have created. That is a much harder thing to happen. Let me tell you, this is not trivial at all. In fact, people get so attached to their domain of knowledge. I have seen, and they say, no, I'm the center of the universe. My domain of knowledge is the center of universe. And what do I care about others? It's not worth it, right? So while it gave us advantages dealing and handling knowledge, the shadow of that structure is also very visible. So therefore, we had to create, invent these words which are called interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, out of disciplinary. All of this is a huge misunderstanding. It's a huge misunderstanding because if we don't fragment, then we don't need to synthesize. And so fragmentation is for a particular cause, and that cause must be kept in mind. It is not to be extrapolated out of that cause. So now when we come to research, for example, the research, there are two kinds of research which I would very clearly like to share with my younger colleagues. The two kinds of doing research is one, the first research is tool-centric, because tools is what we start with. Because if I am a certain kind of chemist, I know 3 or 5, 4 tools that I have learned very well. Then I go about searching for a problem that would fit this tool. but no problem in its entirety will fit this tool. Absolutely, 100%. It will never fit that tool. Nothing negative I'm saying about it. Okay, we are already in some ways governed by machines. I mean, what route I take today, how do I drive, and all that stuff is dictated by machines. That is true. So a whole lot of our decision making today depends on that. But the point is, how is that a total dependence, right? Who do I date? Who do I marry? What food I should eat? Which path I should take? Which classes I should attend? Every aspect of our life may get governed by machines. It's a huge challenge. But now Industry 4.0, it builds on, and I'll tell you why it's relevant, I mean, in a second. So Industry 4.0 and going beyond for all foreseeable future of humanity on planet Earth, it builds on data, it builds on the pyramid of knowledge, right? So whoever controls the pyramid of knowledge controls everything. It doesn't matter if you have raw material. It doesn't matter if you have people. Whoever controls data, measurements, information, knowledge, and the control of that knowledge, turning it into opportunities, which is called innovation, is basically who controls the world today and going in the all foreseeable future. Now, we must differentiate between data, information, knowledge, and even wisdom. So as you go higher and higher in this pyramid of knowledge, the data and measurements sit at the bottom, and now there's so much of it. In fact, the data created in last 4 years is more than created in the entire history of humanity previous to that. And so this is what we call exponential growth. It's the exponential growth of technologies, exponential growth of data. Talking about data, all our younger people should remember that traditionally, historically, we have treated raw material with contempt. We have not understood the value of raw material. Today, data is that raw material. Data is that new fuel. Data is that new water, if you would. And if we don't, because it takes a lot of effort and money to create purposeful data. If you let that data go for just for the asking, then we have made a big blunder, because we would then be treating it same as any other raw material that we sell cheap. It goes somewhere, it comes with value addition, and it comes back to us. That has been the history. Anyhow, so we need to build on that data ourselves, and which is what you call algorithms or artificial intelligence, machine learning, or information. To extract information from that data is how you bring value to that data, which means you have to organize in a particular way and all that. Now is a whole science that I'm not going into. From information, you must get to knowledge. What is the difference between information and knowledge? While we are not taught these things, and that's the reason that I would, even though it may get a little bit, I understand totally that it may get a little bit boring, but it is something that needs to be discussed very clearly, because this is, nobody told me that in any of the classes, for sure. I don't know about you, maybe you're more lucky. So the knowledge, the difference between knowledge and information is information are random facts of some kind which are obtained from data. Knowledge is the matrix in which you interpret this information. So there is a generalized framework, if you would. Let's say F equal to MA will actually would integrate, would explain whole lot of information that happens in this world. So that is knowledge. From knowledge, the hope is that you also get some amount of insight and wisdom. That is one bifurcation of knowledge. The other bifurcation of knowledge is that you get, through this understanding, deep understanding of knowledge, you know how to control it. And so that control is extremely important. Otherwise, there's a use of knowledge, if you would. Now, of course, we must understand that there are two different systems in society, one that creates knowledge, the other that consumes knowledge. Universities are mostly basically intended for creation of knowledge and also transmission of knowledge. Transmission of knowledge, mostly passive, the knowledge which has been created before, but we are not equally good at understanding how this knowledge actually has to grow in a relevant direction. What is that direction? What is the quality of that direction? What is the relevance of that direction? The reason we're not well aware of that is because we are not well connected with the ecosystem that uses knowledge. You see, so oftentimes I hear, for a very long time I've been hearing, there's a very popular misconception. People say, hey, India is number 3 in the number of scientific publications in the whole world. We have been climbing very rapidly through that, staircase, which is very good, which is fantastic given our constraints, given our, all the things that we have. Truly, there are constraints, and we have to work on removing those constraints. But despite those constraints, we have done reasonably well. But then the second question comes, oh, if that is so, then how come the science is not empowering our society? Why are we dependent imports? 85% of biomedical devices are imported, right? Despite the fact that we have great biomedical scientists, great biologists, great technologists, great IT people, all of that we have. You see, so you should ponder, you should stop and say, what is wrong, right? So I'll tell you what is wrong. What has been historically and traditionally the weak point is that the interface between knowledge creators and knowledge users is either non-existent or is very weak. Now, this is not only a problem of university. I'm not saying that at all. It is not a problem of individual scientists. It is not a problem only of university, because it depends on that, university has to push its knowledge actively. But there also has to be a pull for that knowledge from the other side. So it is a push and pull, they're matching together with a common purpose, is what makes knowledge useful, is what empowers a society through this knowledge. And so that brings me to discussing very quickly about the difference between invention and innovation. In fact, this is something which is not understood also by even most scientists who have worked for 50 years. And this is very critical to understand actually what is it that we need to do in our universities, in our industries, and connecting them together. So often people think innovation is something which is a smart idea, it's a great idea, it's a disruptive idea, it's something, they say, hey, what an innovative idea. But all of these meanings are not totally correct. So let us look at what is invention. To put it very simply, invention is a black box. It can be a university. The input to that black box are resources like money. It may flow from the Ministry of Education. It may come from tuition fee. It may come from wherever it comes. It does the processes of invention do some churning around in this black box, and out comes the knowledge. So output is knowledge, input is resources and money, infrastructure. Innovation is 180-degree out of phase with invention. It is, in mathematically speaking, it is orthogonal to invention. So both its processes and its concept of innovation is orthogonal, which means has no point of meeting with invention. Innovation begins where invention ends. So now we think of innovation as a black box. The input to that black box is knowledge, and out comes the new money, the new socio-economic opportunities. So you see, it is basically invention and innovation working together. Complete the knowledge, complete the circle of knowledge. So we can think of knowledge as a pyramid. We can also think of knowledge as a circle. And since we are talking about sustainability, if we think about sustainability of knowledge in a society, then invention is only half the circle. It will not lead to sustainability of knowledge. In other words, if we were to only put in money and create knowledge, but not use that knowledge to create new money, then the whole circle is not sustainable. And this is a very critical point to understand. So we take knowledge. So now if we look at the concept of startups, what is a startup? A startup is an entity which is a twilight zone between invention and innovation. And that is why it is actually an interface between the knowledge system, which is embedded in its back, an idea, a prototype, a knowledge, and its front end is connected to the market and society. So therefore, this is a black box which makes these two compartments compatible with each other. Now we know, of course, I'm a professor, you are a professor. If you were to talk to a person that we call totally from industry who has no appreciation for knowledge, nothing, then you will be speaking totally different language. And it is, you have seen this movie Lost in Translation. It is totally like Lost in Translation. This guy is saying, give me something, I can make money tomorrow. And you are saying, look, I mean, tell me what you want. Maybe I'll work for 1 year and I'll create something for you, right? So this, there's a split, if you would, between what I call Lakshmi and Saraswati, and the mutual respect that they ought to have for each other and understand each other's demands and needs and to work with each other. That split is very hard to understand and also to fill that gap, if you would. Right. So now, of course, that a lot of effort has to be made in that direction. For example, or just about 5, 6 years ago, I started a new program called Nidhi in DST. It's an acronym, but basically it looked at all the processes of innovation. Innovation is a chain. It is not a single event. You have to motivate, you have to scout, you have to train, you have to prepare people to take this plunge. It's also cultural. Then they need to have some pre-incubation support. Then they need to have seed support. They need to have networking. They need to make business plans. They need to be connected, and then they need to work with other kind of people who are not like themselves. They may not be scientists. They may be marketing people, right? So this becomes very critical that we understand that problem solving is not a domain of a single knowledge compartment. And so oftentimes I've seen startups fail not because they don't have a great idea. In fact, they have a great idea, but they are confined to idea. They have not understood the market at all. Okay, they have not understood, what is it that people demand? What is the functionality that people demand? At what price level do they demand it? What is the market size? Who are your competitors? What are the other ways to fulfill this demand, and so on? See, so what it means is a whole lot of these very clever, very smart kids, they fail right at the end because they are unable to work with people who are not like themselves. They are fearful of losing control. And this fear of losing control is so inherent in all of us as academicians as well. So they say, hey, this is my turf. I've seen 20 years ago, maybe not now. I remember somebody who said, why are you working in biology? You are a chemical engineer, right? And I was always very, very amused with those kind of things, right? And this, in fact, even continues today because people have made these little gangs, if you would, and they protect their turf. And they say, hey, who are you? Why are you, this is my, area, right? People get so attached and so possessive of, even abstract things like knowledge, right? That they think it's like money and it's my money. And, the outsiders are not welcome. You see, this is not going to be effective. It's never been effective and it will not be effective in the future. It will become less and less effective. In fact, we have to seek out people who are not like ourselves. This is the first thing I've learned. I've never talked to chemical engineers because there's nothing I need to learn from there. Okay, so it would be much better for me to speak 10 minutes with a philosopher because you see, every exchange of information and material and energy happens by gradient. This is the first principle in the nature. So unless you have a gradient, water would flow downhill from uphill. That gradient has to be there in my understanding and his understanding. So, and this is how we, this brings to my mind another very important issue today and in the future, which we call diversity, which we call inclusion, where we call equity, all of that, right? Is so important because this is yet another kind of diversity that we may not always be comfortable with. But so once you have this psychological makeup, you say that, hey, am I 100% only chemical engineer? Do I define myself only by my gender? Do I define myself only by, my degree? Do I define myself only by the clothes that I wear? All of that is only external. Now, when you get to the core of the matter, you see that this is respecting diversity, not as a lip service. This is not a political slogan. Not the way I'm looking at it. Right. What I'm looking at is diversity is the essential ingredient that brings empowerment to everything that we do because it brings different perspectives. Now, when you look at sustainable development, climate change, all of this stuff that we are talking about, how can you solve those problems by saying that only one gender will participate in it? Because those are not problems which are related to a gender. Those are problems that require different perspectives, different solutions, and different participation in those solutions of the society as a whole. So it is a shared responsibility, and it's no point saying, yeah, okay, no. See, there would be one kind of technology that comes when people with a certain perspective, narrow perspective, they work on it, and that is not always the optimal solution. This is not always the solution, and therefore you need participation of every single person, no matter how different he or she looks. And this is so, like I said, this is not simply because, oh, yeah, okay. Often in fact, the Women's Day we had 8th, right? The day before yesterday, there were some speakers who were saying we need to empower women. They are our mother, they are our wife, they're my sister, daughter, which is all very good. But I fundamentally disagree with that perspective. Okay, I'm saying regardless of whether they are not or are or not, they are independent, right? And they need to have the same level playing field as all of us, right? Regardless of my relation or otherwise with them, right? So this is not the right way to argue about things. So this is fundamentally so. Look, as a biologist, our scientist here, so she knows why diversity is respected in nature. You see, nature is nothing but diversity because the same function is addressed in many n number of different ways. If it is mobility, you can fly, you can swim, you can crawl, you can walk on 2 feet, 4 feet, every possible thing, right? So now you may start saying, "No, no, this is not a good way to go from one place to another. No, we should only have wheels, right? No matter how optimal that solution is, it would fall short of survival. The reason is if we were all alike, if we were optimized, even if we were totally optimized, even if that was possible, and we were all alike, then we will all fall together with the first virus that hits us. Okay, so while you may be surviving very optimally when there is no new challenge, as soon as there is a new challenge that you cannot deal with, then the whole society would fall together. Diversity is that bulwark that guarantees against it. So no matter what the challenge is, you would always be standing. So some part of you will always be standing. And this is very intimately related to science. I mean, don't make any mistake about saying, oh, why, this is not about chemistry and stuff. So why is it important for me? This respect through understanding of diversity. So gender, of course, is the biggest part of that diversity and inclusion because 50% by definition. But there are other aspects. For example, youth, right? So now we see Oriental culture, we think wisdom comes by age. Somehow is related. If I'm 50 plus, then I'm wiser than 40 plus, who in turn is wiser than 20 plus. There's some of it. Certainly, one gains more experiences, with age. But it does not necessarily mean that in every single case that the contribution of the youth can be ignored. Other words, that we have to cultivate leadership in young people at an early age. So to give you an example, in DST, my standing instructions are that every expert committee must be gender and age balanced. So it is the balance and perspectives, the diversity that we seek. Now, what is the balance in age? In age, younger people have more energy and more desire and capability to change. Whereas the people who are less young, they have more experiences and perhaps a little deeper understanding of a situation because of experience. So we have to leverage both of these together. Right. It also happens that with age, I become a little more resistant to change. I may become more fixed in my ideas. But younger people, they can take higher risk. They are not so risk averse, and they have more energy. So it is basically this combination of the two, the best in what each one has to offer, is basically how you build a good system, how you build a good process, how you bring that good architecture. And this happens by appreciating the diversity. This happens by saying, by focusing on the strength, not focusing on the weakness. So oftentimes we are become very negative, and we say, this young guy, what does he know? By the way, I should relate to you an amusing incident from my own experience. So I became a fellow of INSA, was relatively young, maybe about 42, something like that, when most of the fellows are 60 plus. Now the average age of fellows maybe, I don't know, 65, 70, something like that. So, and then I was in this committee soon after, which selects fellows. So very next year, I was in committee for engineering, where you have to select new fellows. So I was arguing about saying, look, we cannot just be totally subjective. This was many years, 20, few decades, 20 years ago, something like that. So we said, look, I was the only young guy, and I kept arguing that, look, we cannot select fellows just based on subjectivity totally. We also had to bring in some indices like, okay, citations and stuff. Nobody had heard of those things in back then. How do you get citations? What is the meaning of that? What is impact factor? Right? So I can clearly relate it. You see this desire for change, for bringing a new perspective that others have bypassed, right? I'm not saying that indices is the only way to determine things. I'm saying a balance, okay, between, when I read a paper, I look at its contribution and quality. But at the same time, I should also look at, how many other people have interest in this paper, for example, and so on. So it's a question of balance. But the amusing part was, after a lot of this, because I was always very argumentative, so to say. And so I remember one member said, we don't take anybody below 50 seriously. He was saying half jokingly, but the point is that this is indeed the prevalent notion in the society, right? So, and this is also somewhat a little bit oriental, if you would. This is embedded in our culture. Look, we respect people for their age. I have no problem with it. But you see, when you are talking about a particular area of expertise, we cannot say that somebody who is younger does not have as much expertise as I do, right? And so this understanding, I think if we can create from an early age, cultivate leadership in the young people. If we cultivate leadership in women, that would go a long way in empowering our science and technology. Oh, by the way, are we out of time? You see, I often lose total, contact with time. Yeah, because these things are so wide, and there's never an end of it. In any case, so you just tell me.
No, you have lots of time, and we are very interested in what you're saying, sir.
Oh, okay. But don't tell me later I didn't warn you. Okay, so
Not at all. It's our treat. It's our treat.
And especially the younger people. Oh, by the way, I never called anybody old. I've never met an old person in my whole life. That is true. There are younger people and young people, right? So somebody is always younger than the young people, right? And so it is about that. And another amusing thing I'll tell you, this is very closely related to our processes of doing science. You see, when I was younger, I so well vividly recall that all these younger people hang around together and we criticize who we call old timers, right? And now that I am on the other side, I am pushing 60. Now I hang around these people who are not so young, and all of them are criticizing the younger people. Okay, the same set of people, when we were young, we were criticizing the older. And when we are older, we are criticizing the younger. Now, you see, the point is, the only constant in life is criticism. Okay, it is not what we criticize. We all need to find some way to find some, latch on to some negativity and start criticizing. This is very counterproductive. Okay, I have not found a single person who has prospered as a creative scientist by being in negativity. And this is true not only of creative science, it is true of everything in the society. So while there may be many problems, nobody says there are no problems, right? But the question is you understand those problems and be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so oftentimes the way I put it is saying, look, one way colorful metaphor that I have thought about myself while watching some movie called Dracula or something like that, I say we should get rid of energy vampires, right? So, all these vampires, they suck blood out of us. But we know people, you sit with them for 2 hours, you will become a zombie yourself. I mean, you would start seeing everything which is wrong with this world, right? And you would not just see there's no world except the world that the meaning that we give to this world. So while there is an objective world of objects in science, there is also a meaning to that world. And that meaning to that world is what our brain actually projects on that world. So I see that, the whole, people who would become totally disoriented, they are under a lot of pressure and so on, because they have seen nothing good about this world. Uh, and they are basically, people who are just into complaints. So this is very important. I tell all younger people that, look, while it is good to complain, now at the end of it, basically you have to roll up your sleeves, bring all the energy and enthusiasm in providing even if a very small part of that solution. And so that is where people disappear. I mean, a whole lot of people come here in my office. They are saying this, they are saying that. For example, they are saying, my project proposal, it was not evaluated properly. I did not get fair hearing from the expert committee. Of course, first I explained them that secretary has no role in whether your project is evaluated fairly or not, because we have hundreds of committees. They each look at their own area and they opine. They may be wrong. I'm not saying they're not always right. But the point is, when this person says that he did not get, his reviews of the proposal were superficial, I asked him how many proposals has he reviewed. Now, you see, when it comes to turn for this person to review it, by and large, our scientists have a great deal of, a sense of privileges, but less sense of accountability. Now, I'm saying that with all humility. I'm saying that as a scientist myself. Okay, I'm not saying that as some bureaucrat or something like that, right? So now for every proposal that I submitted, I received 3 reviews. I expect those reviews to be objective. I expect those reviews to be written with care and in a fair way, right? But when I'm sent a proposal to review, 3 proposals to review, I'm often thinking, what is this? Why should I spend my time on it? So this is what is called the shared responsibility. Our processes and structures would only be as effective as each one of us is in doing our what we call duty. When we expect others to do something in a proper way, that for me, I have to do the same thing in that same proper way that I expect from others. And this is about strengthening our review processes in science and all of that. We cannot make a healthy science ecosystem unless, in addition to doing our own research, we have to spend some of our time and resources for this system, because this system is not DST, it is not DBT. Okay, it is each one of us. You see, so we make this mistake that somehow somebody up there is making all these decisions, and these decisions are not fair. If we want them to be fair, then I have to be fair and I have to devote time, when I'm called upon to do this. Okay, other thing, when I was talking about diversity and gender inclusion and so on, I just want to say very quickly, and I want to appeal to people who are listening here, that there are 2 new programs that we are seeding related to this. The first thing, which is focused on creating next generation women leadership. For example, getting women into top colleges of the country in underrepresented areas. Now, if you were to look at, let's say, mathematics, you would look at theoretical sciences, you look at engineering, the number of women in top colleges is very little. In fact, when I was doing BTech in IIT, at that time, by the way, IIT Kanpur used to be number one. And this is what happens if you let things slide. The great universities of the yesteryears can slide. We are not very careful, in arresting that slide. So at that time, in a batch of 250 students, there were 3 women. Today, there may be about 10% women, but in underrepresented areas, horrible. If we don't have women there, we're not going to create next generation role models and leadership, which is what is required for cultural transformation. The confidence that this girl in high school must have, that there is no area that she doesn't have to do only home science. Of course, that's gone now, thank God. Okay, but but there are certain areas which are preferred for girls, but it depends on the aptitude of the girl. So therefore, there's a program called Vigyan Jyoti, which has been launched in 100 districts involving 10,000 top performing girls in high school. Next year, based on this pilot, we would do it in every district of the country and 50,000 top performing girls in high school. All their things would be addressed. What are the things that we need to address? We need to address cultural issue, number one, which means let them talk to all these leaders in different walks of life, women leaders, whether they are throwing a missile, whether they're in the corporate sector, whether they are in university, academia, R&D labs, wherever, right? They must interact and give them that confidence. Their parents and their teachers also need to have this cultural transformation. So it's all part of these Vigyan Jyoti camps, science camps. Second, many of the girls, they don't go to coaching classes. Their parents don't want to invest and it's very far and something, right? So they would also get training, which is required to crack some of the exams. At the same time, if they have financial needs, they will take care of financial needs. So it's about convincing their parents and stuff and all of that. So you see, it's a multi-dimensional problem. You cannot find a single solution to this problem. And finally, maybe parents are not sending them to a college which requires money. And they say, no, you go to the neighborhood college, you do something, right? So that also has to be addressed, okay, where the need is there. So anyhow, this one, and this would require participation of all of us who are committed to this cause. So again, it is not only by, of course, DST gives money and we'll set up a structure. We'll set up a structure with Navodaya Vidyalayas, right? So all these classes and the stuff will be there. But, any volunteer force that we can create, and which is what we are doing, right? Spend a little bit time with these girls in whichever way, bring this insights in there. The second program is called Gati. The Gati program is about ranking and rating institutions on gender progress. So I'm very happy to report that 200 universities, institutions have come on board voluntarily. So right now, we have not made it anything, there's no arm twisting. They're saying, look, if we want to make a progress, we should first know where we are. What are our weaknesses? So if you give 10 parameters and let know where we are, idea is not anybody to look bad. Idea is to measure progress. We must be able to measure this progress year to year. We're saying, do we have child care facilities, for example? We may not have. Do we have a committee which is effectively functioning in terms of harassment? We may or may not have, but we need to know, right? So after we know all this, if we can see if the progress is being made in these parameters, then we can also incentivize and give something. So these are 2 new programs which are related to women. There are other programs in DST, as you may know. Finally, you see, I'm really, really warning you, if you don't stop me, my next meeting is only 12:30. So I would continue to speak until then without any hindrance. But you can stop me anytime. There is no problem at all.
We
Right.
had a question session, but
We have questions.
well, no, then we can mail the questions to
Right.
you.
Then what I'll do is I'll conclude
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
quickly,
Okay.
just talking about a couple of concepts. You see that these are general misconceptions in academia. One of them is always we are thinking about some conflict. You're saying basic versus applied, right? It is one of these conflicts, for example. So people say, no, I'll do basic research. Others will say, I only do theoretical research, not experimental. Others will say other way around. These are conflict points that we have created between basic and applied, between theoretical and experimental, between industry relevant, not industry relevant, patentable, not patentable. Really, there is no conflict between any of these categories. Don't waste time on it, arguing even about it. So, what is the real point of conflict today is between profound and incremental, good science and bad science. Okay, profound with quality, incremental to fill my CV. I have done a lot of it myself. Again, our moderator, Professor Nida Khan, said that I have written 270 papers. Actually, they are more than 350. And not that it matters. The reason I think you took my CV from some old place. That doesn't really matter. But I am not equally proud of all those papers. You see, I must admit that perhaps if I only wrote 70 of those, then my life would have been fulfilled. Okay, a whole lot of this happens because of the force of habit. You see, what happens is we as academicians, we don't know what else to do. So we often say, hey, there is some security in writing papers. At least I took care of one thing in my life, change my area of research every 7 years. It's called 7-year itch. Right. So I'm not learning anything new after 7 years. I'm saying, why am I hanging around here? Right. So even though, so this changing of areas, of course, it has some pros and cons. It's not recommended for everybody, only if you are not faint of heart and you are willing to take risk and so on. That is okay. Some people can do it. What I was saying is that you see the conflict is between being profound, being disruptive, being with quality, or simply doing incremental work. Now, you see, the incremental work doesn't make anybody wiser. I'm totally firmly come to this conclusion. There is a waste of time. Even after people become full professors, now I ask them, what do you got to look forward to? Now, I mean, let go. It's time that we now stop thinking about writing more papers, but really get into learning. That we have something to offer, which would, that would be disruptive. That would be this. People keep saying why we are not producing Raman, we are not producing Nobel Prize winners and so on, right? This is because starting from education, which is not about learning, starting from there, and our PhD training is something I really wanted to talk about because it's so close to my heart. But not only that, is the pillar on which our entire research ecosystem rides. These are the foot soldiers. I'm using that word with respect, right? So it's the strength of PhD, our PhD programs, which is the key to understand whether we would continue to do incremental work or we would have the confidence to actually jump into high risk research and even have the capacity to fail, to take those blows and move on from there. Culturally, we are not prepared for it. Education has not prepared us for that. Nothing in the society has prepared us to fail. In fact, there was this writer, I forget his name now. But anyway, this in high school I used to read, and after that it was quoted by Ernest Hemingway. The quote is, "It's better to have loved and lost than not to have loved at all." So this love for something in this life, with some commitment, so to say, we may fail. That is not the issue at all. Neither success nor failure are forever. So sometimes people, console people by saying that failure is only transitory. It does not last forever. That's only half the truth. The success also does not last forever. So both success and failure, younger people must totally understand, would alternate in life. So therefore we take risk and we should do something big. right? Instead of doing those small things there. Typically a paper today which is written is read by half a reader and it is cited less than one time. Okay, so having spent so much time and effort and resources on it, you would think that I should be doing something better in this life, isn't it? So, but this has also to do with not only individual researcher. I must say that this has to do with the entire system, and because we have the leader, right here of the best university in the country. So, all these issues that we are discussing, they are not only for researchers, scientists. Individually, I can make very little change in my. But how do we empower when we talk about multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary? Do we have the structures, processes, incentives to actually take that path? Do we have the, I know that it's not there. For example, you see one of my students, brilliant student, he did MSc Physics, but he did PhD in Chemical Engineering with me. And I had told him when he joined me, I said, you will not get an academic job in this country because he's multidisciplinary. So while we are doing lip service to being multidisciplinary every day, in every meeting I go to, every conference I go to, and I just, at the end of it, I ask the IIT directors, I say, would you take this guy? He has a permanent job in US, thank God. He is highly valued. He's got all the papers and citations and H index and everything for a young person. But no IIT would touch him. So this requires reflection. We cannot now forever say one thing and do another, right? I mean, this is what we call hypocrisy. And this is, whether it's about gender, whether it's about multidisciplinary, whether it is about promoting, this risk-taking ability, which means, when I'm going to be promoting somebody, am I going to count his papers or I'm going to count his commitment, right? Is there a way to count that commitment, right? I'm sure everything is possible. It's a question of mindset. It's a question of culture. And so I would now indeed conclude. There are a lot more. I'd be happy if you call me to discuss these things with people with any question. So I would conclude by saying, there's a lot of talk. We say a lot of things about how science, technology for Atmanirbharta. So we all know that science and technology are strong requisites for Atmanirbharta. And we have seen that in COVID-19 time. In fact, before COVID-19 time, we had nothing, no PPEs, no N95, no diagnostics. Certainly no vaccine and no hope for vaccine. In fact, I was talking to scientists and they were so negative. They said, how can you get vaccine in 1 year, 6 months? No. It takes 10 years, right? It was a mindset. Let me tell you, everything is driven by a mindset. It's not driven by realities. It is driven by our expectations. I mean, if we don't ask ourselves very demanding questions and totally demanding action, then we would just simply go by, we'll say, earlier vaccines took 10 years. So it's perfectly okay to take 10 years. And we had no diagnostics, right? And this was a total terror staring in our faces. And I so remember my office was never shut down during any of this entire 1 year. You see, so we have been always working. I remember terror days and saying, what are we going to be doing? But you see, if there's a common purpose, if there's a shared purpose between industry, startups, academia, R&D, and the government, everything is possible. It is with this shared purpose. It is with this zeal, as if it's going to affect me and my life. My life depends on it. Then only things and the solutions come, and they happen with the scale, they happen with the speed, and they happen with quality. No doubt about it. So, to conclude, this Atmanirbharta also has 3 very strong cultural pillars. And it's important to pay attention to them in education, starting from education, early days. This is Atmavishwas, self-confidence. I've never seen my students lack in intelligence, but they sometimes lack in confidence that they can do it. Whether it is starting a startup, whether it is rolling up their sleeve and jumping in the deep end of the ocean, the pool, this requires confidence. And so it is cultural. If we keep telling people they are no good, this is what we do in every class, right? Every parent is doing that, abusing their children, saying they're no good. This totally destroys the confidence. And so this is confidence. Then another is, self-respect. So Atma Samman is very important. People who don't have Atma Samman cannot give it to others. Atma Samman is not focused on oneself. Okay, it is certainly it should focus. I mean, it should have Atma Samman means I understand who I am. I understand my weaknesses. I understand my strengths. But despite all that, I respect people. Okay, and this is, and then, Atma Chintan, the third pillar of Atma Nirbharta. Atma Chintan is not same as Atma Chinta or Chinta. Chinta is negative. Atma Chintan is a scientific, objective analysis of things, right? So Chintan means to plan in a scientific way. And scientific way of planning is based on evidence, is based on hard data, no matter if I like it or not like it, right? This is the scientific way. Okay, and which reminded me that I must say this and then totally conclude. You see, we often talk about, what do we call it? Scientific temper, right? So we all heard about scientific temper, and it is in fact part of our constitution, very unique aspect of our constitution, that to cultivate scientific temper is the basic duty of our citizens. So this is very curious. I have asked people, what do they understand by scientific temper? Right? I have not received, I'm so sorry to say, a very satisfactory answer to this question. If we want to cultivate scientific temper, we must first know what it is, the nature of the beast. So I know the right kind of instruments to develop it, right? Now, most often people think that scientific temper comes by scientific education, which means if I have done BSc, I got more scientific temper than a high school guy. If I have done MSc, then more than BSc. If I have done PhD, then more than MSc, right? And postdoc and so on, right? Nothing could be farther from truth. Okay, it has no direct formal correlation with my scientific education, because science is what I do in the lab for my living, for my salary. When I'm out of it, I totally lose scientific temper in 2 seconds. Finally, I thought a lot about it. I said, what is scientific temper? So to my limited understanding of what I could come up with, is that, look, scientific temper is the dispassionate, data-driven, evidence-driven analysis of a situation. Okay, that's all it is, nothing more. And to go beyond that, full scientific temper is to act on that conclusion, even when it is in conflict with myself. Okay, which is oftentimes my analysis may be very good. It's all totally scientific. I say I should be doing this, but I don't do it because somehow my self-interest is compromised by taking that decision that is arrived at by scientific temper, right? So there are two aspects of scientific temper: to arrive at the right decision based on evidence, data, so on, and then to act on it. And the real test of scientific temper is when I'm sitting in a committee and my nephew has applied for that grant, and that nephew is not found suitable, okay, for that grant, right? Then, I should stick to that decision. And this is what I would call scientific temper is so required to do right kind of science, quality science in the country, indeed to empower the society. And so thank you, allowing me this I can't do it. It's like 1 hour or so. This liberty of going overboard, and it's so kind of you. I'm very, very thankful to you for this opportunity. Thanks, I stop there.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an enriching, informative, and illuminating lecture. Now I would request our Vice Chancellor, ma'am, for a few words.
Thank you. Very rarely have I heard such an illuminating and such and doing it very informally. It was like sitting in a room and talking to somebody who's a learned person, but he's not trying to throw his weight around. He's not telling us that he knows more than we do. But definitely, I'm really obliged that you agreed to come here, because when we invited you, we invited the secretary DST, but we found that we have a person who is so humble, who is so knowledgeable, and yet treating us as a trying to give his own example, and many a time saying that I'm not very good in this and that. So you keep on bringing us to you coming down to our level, and you are a perfect teacher, sir. I'm so happy to have you here, and please do keep on visiting Jamia, because we need you more and more. Not only in a very formal mode, but also to talk to our teachers who have been writing papers, like you said, writing papers, but the main reason that a scientist should do has to be what you pointed out, that if you had written 70 papers, it would have been much useful. So I'm extremely grateful. I have been taking all your notes. These 5 pages of notes that I have taken, I'm going to put them on my computer, and because they are giving me so many things to food for thought, as well as some material that I can use in my speaking to others, because it was such a pleasure to hear you. Thank you.
Professor Akhtar, please share these with me too, because I forget I say different things at different times. And so it'll be good for me to keep, if you can share them with me, it'll be.
I'll do that. I'll do that. But although they are very haphazardly written by me, only which I can understand, but I'll try to translate it into a more better communication and send it to you.
No, if you do, thank you. I'm not saying you should. If you do it, please share with me.
Also, some very important decisions, some important definitions that you have given. Definitions that we have never thought. What is the difference between these two? So this is something very important.
Why I had to think about it is because CSIR was starting a new Bhatnagar Award in innovation. And I was a member of that committee about 15 years ago. And this committee met 3 times and could not come up with a definition of innovation, much less how to measure it. Because they said other things, we know how many papers are written and all this, but how would we measure innovation? And I thought, because that's why there is no innovation award, Bhatnagar Award, because we could not come up with anything. Then it bothered me a lot. For many years, it bothered me a lot. I said, we must find a solution to this problem about defining what is innovation, and in fact, how to measure it, how to quantify it, right? And now totally it can be quantified. I have no doubt about it. I would ask the DG CSIR now to start a Bhatnagar Award in innovation. And I would guarantee that I would do that scrutiny.
I must also say before I stop that we were perhaps the most readily available university for Gati. And the lady who is sitting here, our Dean Faculty of Natural Sciences, is the one who has been nominated by me to look after Gati, Professor Simi. So I think we'll definitely be in very active participant in that program. Mainly because Sanjay Mishra ji was also telling us that what a program it is, and we came up with it. Thank you very much for being with us. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, sir. We are obliged to have the company of all the wonderful dignitaries. And now I would like to invite Professor Simi Farhad Basir, Dean Faculty of Natural Sciences, for the vote of thanks and conclusion of our event. Professor Basir is a professor and former head of the Department of Biosciences. She is an esteemed immunologist and has authored 2 books and several research articles. I would like to invite Professor Simi Farad Bassi for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Nida. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, we are here to celebrate 100 years of Jamia and science. It was a very long time ago that Plato once said that science is nothing but perception. But then since that long time ago, we have come a long way. And I must say that the good thing about science is that it is true, whether we believe in it or not believe in it. Because without science, there is no change in the world. All said, I feel that scientists should always state the opinions upon which their facts are based. The word science has its roots in the Latin word scientia, which means knowledge, which is what Professor Ashutosh Sharma was also talking about, knowledge and science. So science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of explanations that can be tested and predictions that can be made about the universe. Science makes people inquisitive and impartial to the inferences that they draw from their research. It also helps in creating new knowledge. It helps in improving education and increasing the quality of our lives considerably. The practical impact of scientific research has led to the emergence of science policies that seek to influence scientific enterprise by giving priority to development of commercial products, armaments, healthcare, public infrastructure, and also environmental protection. So it is imperative that both science and technology must respond to the needs of the society and also to the global challenges that are thrown up to us every now and then. Here at Jamia, we have a very robust scientific environment. We have 7 departments and 6 centers of research in the Faculty of Natural Sciences. And apart from this, we also have a Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which we are trying to build up more so that to bring whatever knowledge we are generating into the mainstream of society. All the departments of Faculty of Natural Sciences are supported by FIST and SAP. In the past 1 year alone, 933 research papers were written, 135 book chapters, and 11 books were published by the faculty members of the science faculty. A number of patents also had been published and received by our faculty members. We have in our Faculty of Natural Sciences some young faculty members who in the last year, 2020, they innovated and designed a kit for rapid testing of COVID-19 in the saliva. Our teachers also attended 269 national and international conferences where they presented papers in this last 1 year. Our university organized 54 webinars and extension lectures. Sorry, not the university, but only the Faculty of Life Sciences, Faculty of Natural Sciences. They organized 54 webinars in this 1 year. We have scientific projects that have been sanctioned from different agencies like DST, DBT, DRDO, ICMR, AYUSH, and also MHRD. And the number of these projects for the science faculty stands at 59. The amount of extramural research grant for the Faculty of Life Science is about 22 crores as of now. And in the last 1 year, 109 PhD theses were submitted and awarded to the science of scholars. During this last 1 year, our Center for Information and Technology of our university, held a number of faculty development programs, whereby teachers and non-teachers, they were made savvy regarding the online tools for effective teaching and other jobs. These training programs helped us to impart knowledge to our students very efficiently and successfully during the changed scenario that was brought about by COVID-19. Also, teachers of schools belonging to Delhi Education Society were trained by us on the use of ICT in teaching. A number of our faculty members have been awarded for their work by various agencies. The SERB Women Excellence Award for 2020 has also come to Jamia. A total of 22 awards and recognition has come to Jamia science faculty members because of the high quality of work that they are engaged in. Our professors are also members of councils of institutes and also of scientific and technical committees. Interesting to say, and I'm proud to tell us here in this platform, is that the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award for Science and Technology in Biological Sciences for the last 2 years, 2020 and 2019, has been awarded to alumni of our faculty. The students who passed out from our university have all got very good placements around the world. And as ma'am has just told you, we are into Gati as well as STEM and working towards these programs also. Today, we have Professor Ashutosh Sharma with us, who's Secretary, Department of Science and Technology and a scientist par excellence. He's indeed honored us by addressing us. On behalf of everyone involved in organizing this centenary lecture, I would like to thank Professor Ashutosh Sharma and be grateful to him for sparing his valuable time and joining us and delivering this enlightening talk on the topic Science and Scientists in the New Millennium. Dr. Sharma's talk and his scientific knowledge is truly inspirational and informative. His discourse today would set many a mind thinking anew about diversity, inclusion, and most importantly, accountability. It is overwhelming to see that we have today over 1,000 registrations from all over India, and an equal number of them had also logged in during your talk, sir. We hope that everybody here found the lecture highly edifying and that your time spent listening to it was useful. It has been a very enriching experience for us at the Faculty of Natural Sciences of Jamia Millia in organizing this lecture as a part of the centenary celebrations. And we have many positives to take forward from this lecture. Thank you once again, Professor Ashutosh Sharma. We extend our gratitude to Professor Najma Akhtar, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, under whose vision and leadership we have been able to manage our centenary celebration successfully. Because of the lockdown, we could not actually celebrate the way that we had intended earlier, but we still were able to do a lot. And we were able to do this because of ma'am's constant encouragement and interest. And it is because of this encouragement and interest that the Faculty of Natural Sciences is also flourishing so. Thank you, Madam. All the administrative staff of Jamia, including our registrar, the Office of the Finance, they all pitched in with exceptional support in making this event successful. We are indeed thankful to all of them. A special thanks goes to Dr. Kazim Naqvi Sahab, who's the officiating director of the Center for Information and Technology, and his team for all the technical support that was required for this lecture and webinar, and assuring us that we have a glitch-free event. Last but not the least, we thank the phenomenal support of our students and faculty members, whose extraordinary momentum and incredible zeal as an audience made this event a great success. Wishing everybody a safe and a healthy life during these unprecedented times. Thank you all.
As we bring our centenary event to a close, we once again thank you all for allowing us to be here this afternoon and hope that this activity has given you a much clearer understanding of the topic. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day and a safe year ahead.
Bye-bye and stay in touch.